So welcome, and I'm excited to have this conversation today. This is the second event in a series, and I'll show you in a second what that series looks like. And today we're going to focus on what we call scaling or personalizing student success and how you can leverage virtual communities to help improve that process for your coaches or advisors at your school. Yesterday, we talked about the use of communities primarily for fostering peer connection. And in that, if you weren't able to attend that webinar, what that really is about is mostly creating a space that's just for students to talk to students. So give them that location, let them talk about whatever they want, with a real focus on relationship building and helping them kind of find their own micro community that's going to help them succeed in their education journey. Today, the focus is going to be a little bit more on the role that your student success team, and when I say that, we're primarily talking about coaches and maybe advisors, can play in a community to help facilitate better conversation with students and encourage more of them to continue in their journey. And then we have a couple of additional sessions happening tomorrow and Friday. If you haven't signed up for the series, you can do so. I'm sure Danielle will drop the link in the chat. It would be interesting to know. So I'm going to introduce my team in a second, but it would be great to know who we have on the call. Let us know who you are, where you're from. And if you were here yesterday, give a little shout out for that so we know. I am going to try really hard not to repeat too much of the content from one day to the other. So we really do use one of the awesome things about the Inscribe platform is you can use the same platform to provide solutions across all of these different areas. So it really is the same experience, same functionality, but implemented in a different way to accomplish a different goal. So today when we talk, I don't want to just repeat features and functionality, but I really want to talk about the student experience, the coach experience, and some of the values that you'll find by implementing a community strategy in this space. I'm Katie Kapler. I probably should have said that earlier. I am co-founder and CEO at Inscribe. So I'm going to be leading the conversation today, but I'm also joined by Danielle Bonner. She is an awesome member of our team and is going to help keep us on track as part of this conversation. She's going to keep an eye on the chat and make sure I know when questions come in or if there's something that we should specifically address in the conversations that are happening there. I highly encourage you to contribute to the chat. We would love for this to be a two-way conversation. I want to learn from you as much as you might learn from us today. One note on the chat is when you open it, I think it will default to just chatting to me and Danielle. So if you change that to everybody, then you can share your comments with the broader group that we have here today. This session is also being recorded, so we'll share that out at the end of the week along with the whole series, so you can have the full series if you weren't able to make one of the days. Not live with us today, but they should be in the chat, or you may hear from them after this webinar, are Fred Scott, Director of Sales, and Aaron Knox, our Chief Revenue Officer. They are great thought leaders in this space, and if you do have questions about how the community is run, you can certainly reach out to me, but they're great resources as well to kind of think through how this might be implemented at your institution. Anything I missed on the housekeeping?
No, I just want to say thanks to everyone for introducing yourselves in the chat. Katie, we have some serious gardeners in here. This might be
oh yeah, I gotta go back and see.
Yeah, peppers, potatoes, sweet potatoes, cantaloupe, the whole thing. I mean, this is like a farm. I don't know, but you've progressed past gardening, I think, at that point.
I am also trying to grow sweet potatoes this year. I've never done it before. Any tips are welcome. Go ahead.
I shared your contact information in the chat. Directly. Other than that, we have a lot of familiar names in the chat today, some partners in here as well. Yeah, it looks like everyone's here to learn about student success and how they can do that with a digital community.
Awesome. And welcome to all of our current partners. I'm so glad that you're here. I know some of you are using Inscribe in different ways. So we might talk about your use case today, or you might learn something that would help you think about applying Inscribe in a different modality. So we are what we call a community-powered support platform. So a virtual community is really just a digital space where you can bring members of your institution together to talk to one another, to answer questions, to seek advice. We are always focused on sort of a three-pronged outcome model for the schools that we work with. We certainly want to improve the student outcomes, and that might be a little different depending on how we're implementing. Maybe we're thinking about retention, maybe we're thinking about course success, maybe we're thinking about decreasing melt. But in all cases, how do we help more students stay connected and stay on board and work through their education journey? Two things that contribute to that are helping to increase student sense of belonging and helping to improve the confidence of learners. We do have some mechanisms for measuring that as part of our engagements with our partners, and we, whenever possible, love to study that to understand how community is influencing those internal feelings for the students that we work with. And then the last thing that's not listed here, but it is something we're going to talk a lot about today, is scalability. I know in particular, coaches, advisors are such a critical role at an institution. That relationship they build with the student can actually be the thing that is the difference between that student staying or leaving. And they are the persistent voice for that student throughout the process. So obviously faculty play a role in this, other people play a role in this, but they kind of move in and out of the student's life. So having that one individual that can really persist through is so critical. With that said, there is limited time in the day. And so when the workload of these individuals, depending on the institution, can be 1 to several hundred or 1 to even 1,000, it's difficult for them to create that connection that they know they need to create in a scalable fashion. So we are going to talk a lot today about how community can help scale that for those members of your staff. Kind of already talked about this, but a lot of the focus for us today obviously is going to be on scalability. But the reason that we want scalability is we want coaches and advisors to be able to build those relationships with students because they influence things like this. Student belonging. Do I feel valued? Do I feel like I have a authentic connection to the institution that I'm working with? For non-traditional students who maybe are learning online or aren't on campus all the time or are, first generation to come to school, creating this sense of belonging is both more critical and also in some cases more difficult than it is for a more traditional learner. And your team that are providing these coaching services to your learners can be an instrumental part of that, especially if you get in front of them really early, you're maintaining that relationship. So we'll talk a lot about how that can work. Communities are a great avenue to support this type of work for a variety of reasons. One is simply the flexibility that a virtual community offers. You don't have to be in person. It's available to that student 24/7. So it really meets the learner where they are in a very true sense of those words. And as higher education becomes more virtual, as we have more students who aren't living on campus, that flexibility becomes more and more important. We have seen, especially since COVID, a huge rise in the number of students reporting senses of disconnection, challenges with mental health, feeling like, imposter syndrome and challenges like that are becoming more prevalent. And so making sure that you have the ability to address that head on will ultimately help more of your students succeed. And I think we talked about belonging already, and there's plenty of studies. I don't know if we have any that we can share right now, Danielle. If not, we can add them later. But that really demonstrate very clearly the connection between a strong sense of belonging and not just persistence at the university, but long-term post-graduation success once they get into workforce and beyond. So it's so critical, and it's really wonderful that universities have this opportunity to build that positive feeling for their learners, in this intentional way. We kind of touched on this, but I guess I will also kind of lean into the idea that community isn't just about creating more positive outcomes. It's about creating those positive outcomes for all of your learners. And when you have a community that's very flexible, on demand, welcoming, intentional, you will start to create an outsized positive impact for your most vulnerable students. So those people who maybe are coming from underserved communities, they're first generation, it's very difficult sometimes for those students to find their footing. And when you create, as you'll see, some of these community spaces and you pair that with the power of coaching and advising, you can create a transformative experience for those individuals. Okay, before I jump into some examples of how other partners have done this, Danielle, is there anything you want me to touch on from the chat?
I shared a white paper regarding belonging and some statistics there. So that's in the chat. Other than that, I think we're ready to just keep moving along.
Awesome. Okay. So I thought I would just give you a few examples of how some of our other existing partners have implemented Inscribe in this model and some of the outcomes that they've seen. And once we've talked about that, I will jump into the platform and we can look at it live and get a sense of what the actual student experience would be. But when we are talking about a student success community, and specifically, I'm going to start just using the word coaching. Know that when I say that, it could be coaches, it could be advisors, it could be other members of your student success team. But just to simplify, I'm going to use the word coach. The purpose of these spaces is a little bit different than the purpose of what we saw in the peer community yesterday. So peer communities are all about peer-to-peer connection. Let you meet people, help you find your micro community that's gonna get you feeling motivated and connected and help you succeed. In a coaching community, there's really a dual purpose. One is quite simply the dissemination and organization of information. So I'm guessing at your institution, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of resources, services, opportunities that you have for your students. And I'm guessing that a good portion of them are underutilized. Part of the reason for that is often that students just don't know that they exist or have a difficult time finding them. So you can use your community as a way to centralize that information. Unlike a website, however, a community allows that information to be refreshed really quickly and easily. And it also creates a two-way conversation. So if you're sharing a resource or service with students and the student has a question about it, they can do that directly in the platform. And we'll see an example of that. But just think about the scalability that that offers your coaching team, that they can take that set of information that they need to disseminate and do it all at once for all the learners and focus their time on more constructive sort of one-on-one conversations. And that's really the second piece of it. I will say that our philosophy at Inscribe tends to be more the merrier. So when we work with people, we often encourage them to create communities that are as big as possible to bring together the most diverse set of voices. That's not untrue in these spaces of coaching, but there's a secondary goal, which is really to help the coach in a more scalable way create a direct and positive relationship with this set of individuals that they are responsible for. So what you'll see in the demo today is that we take a really big space with a lot of people in it, and we actually intentionally carve it up into smaller spaces where coaches have a little more autonomy to directly speak with the individuals that they're coordinating with. And like any community, it has to be a safe space. So, you know, there are no dumb questions. There are, you know, no, everybody is welcome, share your voice, come as you are. And that's more about just how you set up and how you advertise and how you model behavior in your community than anything else. So that's something that we help coach people on in terms of how to get the community up and running. So a few awesome examples. We recently got to start working with the University of North Texas. Absolutely love working with this team. They're very forward thinking about how they want to bring their students together. Our initial engagement with them was more of a pilot, so a smaller subset of the learners on campus. And they built their community specifically as a way to help students build a better ecosystem and have a greater sense of connection among each other. And it was really a coordinated effort among these various departments that you see there. So really coming together to say, how can we influence student success? We launched the community. It had about 1,500 active members. And in just a few months, they had 200 questions asked, and those questions had 27,000 views. So think about that. 200 questions, which is actually a good number of questions for us just a few months. But the number of people that actually benefited from those questions is, you know, multitudes greater. So it really gave a good example of a smaller number of people participating actively in the conversation and an enormous number of people benefiting from the content that was created by those individuals. And that really is the sign of a healthy community. Of course, I sort of buried the lead here, which is they saw just in that one semester a 13% increase in student retention rates. And I have to be honest that when they told me that, I had difficulty repeating it to people because it's such a large number. I felt like I was making it up. But they really just, leaned into the space, committed to supporting it, and have seen really outsized outcomes. At the end of the session today, I'll talk about, we have a webinar coming up specifically with the team at UNT where they'll talk about that process and what their expansion plans are. So stay tuned for that. Danielle, you can drop it in the chat if you happen to have it available. One of our other partners is an institution, BYU-Idaho. I don't know if everyone is familiar with it, as sort of a sister school to Brigham Young University in Utah. They had a slightly different approach to how they thought about their community. So what's unique about them is they have a really large online program and their students are distributed around the world. So it wasn't so much the scalability of, 1 to 100 or 1 to 1,000. It was the flexibility of, I have every time zone. I'm managing students in literally every time zone around the world, and I don't know how to do that in a way that is super effective. So they brought in Inscribe as a way to build a more adaptable asynchronous model of communication between the coaches and the students, or between, in this case, the tutors and the students. And it was super successful. They also were struggling because a lot of the work they had been doing previously was synchronous. Schedule a time with me to talk, let's have a one-on-one meeting. But when you're on 12 hours different time zone, that doesn't work. So what we saw was a huge amount of activity from students, the tutors who were providing the support, providing a really scalable level of support and interaction. And the need for those, synchronous events decreased significantly. So students were able to transition from this synchronous conversation to an easier, more asynchronous model in their community. That was better for the students, better for the tutors, and actually was kind of a cost savings for BYU-I because they didn't have to invest as much in that sort of high value, high cost intervention with the one-on-one. All right, last but not least, is some work that we have done with an organization called WGU Academy. WGU Academy, if you're not familiar, is a part of the Western Governors University ecosystem. It's an organization that does a couple of things, but primarily what we're talking about here is they have a on-ramp program for new undergrads coming to start a degree. So maybe they're coming to start and they don't quite have the qualifications or the experience to be successful, and WGU wants to make sure that they're getting the skills they need so when they actually get in the online program, they're not struggling. So they do this on-ramp through the academy. And the first course that students take is something called PACA. It's kind of like an orientation course, a little bit about learning how to learn, and a lot about meeting coaches and building that relationship with the coach. So they implemented Inscribe. And for them, it was not just a student success, but it was also a scale question. If we're managing tens of thousands of students, how can we do this in an effective way? And after they implemented Inscribe, they saw a huge drop off in the number of individual support requests that they were getting. So think of that like how many people are calling the coach, how many people are directly emailing the coach. Instead, by putting the information in this many-to-many space, the coach could answer a question once and then all the students would benefit. And there wasn't a need to answer it, 10 or 20 or 100 times. So it's been very successful. We've recently expanded our work with them. And probably should set up another webinar with them coming soon. Here are just some examples of questions that you might see in some of these coaching spaces. How do I get connected? Maybe some questions about assignments. But it wasn't just about coach to student support. There's also a lot of opportunity for students to help each other. So the nice thing about these communities is they're welcome, they acknowledge the fact that everybody has knowledge to share, and they welcome everyone to participate as thought leader in certain circumstances. And that's also very reinforcing for learners. That can be really motivating when you feel like, oh, not only did I get help, but I came in and helped somebody else. That's a great feeling. And that alone can be something that helps drive students forward. All right, Danielle, let me pause. I feel like I just talked a lot. Questions?
We don't have any questions at the moment, but I would encourage everyone, if you do have a question, please put it in the chat and I will just jump in and interrupt Katie at any point in time, and we'll make sure we get those answered live for you.
Awesome. So I'm going to do a quick thing on access, because when we do the demo, I'm just going to demo the platform standalone. But really, the platform is designed for integration. So one of the key things if you're implementing a community strategy is you want to make sure the community is available where students already are. And we talked a lot about this yesterday, but wherever your students are already going, put your access point there. And that might be your LMS, it might be your portal, it might be all of the above. But make sure you have that capability, because it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. If it's not right in front of them, you will start to see students like forgetting that it's there and not accessing it as often. And we try to reinforce this just by understanding the importance of mobile. So we do have a native mobile app. Students can put their community in their pocket, take it with them, get their notifications directly on that device. But it's all in service of the same idea, which is we want to meet you where you are, when you are, and allow you to show up how and when you want to show up. Okay, so that was a lot of summary. I hope that was a good sort of setup. And now we'll jump in and actually take a look at what a coaching community could look like. Okay. Okay. So we are now in the Inscribe Inscribe organization and the coaching and student success community. I'll say this every time we do one of these sessions this week. This is everything you see here is customizable. So we will alter the branding to match the branding of your institution. We will rename the community to be something that resonates for you and your students. So just know that this is just an example, but we really do work with you to understand how to make this feel like a natural extension of the tools that your school's already using. And I will just do one quick orientation thing here, which is the communities are primarily organized by topic area. You can see a few examples of that here. And then by channels. And channels are like subgroups within a community. Some communities don't rely very heavily on channels, but in the event of a advising or a coaching space, they can actually prove to be really, really valuable. One of the things that we have learned in these spaces is that while students seem to be really excited about participating in a giant peer community, when it comes to a community around coaching or advising, they actually prefer to participate in a smaller subsegment. So you still might have a big community where everyone's in it together. You're primarily going to use that space to push information to your students. So you can see some examples here, how to get help from your coach, some tips and tricks, how to deal with FAFSA. But when it comes to actually engaging the students and talking to them, a lot of times what they're going to do is go into a smaller space that maybe is owned specifically by their coach. So I'm going to spend a lot of time in that coaching area today talking about how that works. Any questions about that? Does that make sense? Okay,
No
awesome.
questions at this time.
One other thing that I kind of skipped over yesterday, but I think is important, is that you do have this onboarding workflow that's available to your students when they first come into the space. So the purpose of the workflow is to, one, help them understand what the goal of the community is and what your community guidelines are. So you can have a document, you can create a short video, but it really puts in place for them, like, here's what this is for, here's how you should use it, here's the behaviors we expect from you. And then we try to get them engaging in the community in a really easy way. So we'll have them update their profile, we'll have them follow topics that are interesting to them, and then we'll ask them to make their first post, which is usually introducing themselves to the community. But that just kind of smooths the ramp to getting students in there and getting them used to the space and comfortable using it.
Katie, we do have a question in the chat.
Yeah, go ahead.
What kind of training or support do you provide to faculty and staff to help them engage with their digital communities? So coaches as well.
Yes. We should add a slide to the beginning about this, Danielle, which is we are a very hands-on kind of team. Now, there's two sides to this answer. One is the platform itself is actually quite simple and easy to use. So it doesn't take a tremendous amount of either implementation work or training to get up and running. However, we are very big at being a partner during that process. So if you decide to implement Inscribe, you are assigned a dedicated customer success team. They not only guide you through the implementation process, but also stay on board after launch to continue to meet with you regularly and make sure the community is working correctly. And as part of that implementation process, they will help identify who you want to be, the moderators and the administrators of your community, and set up virtual training for them to walk them through that. Supplementing that is that we do have a Inscribe community dedicated specifically to moderators and administrators. And you can find all kinds of resources in there about just like how the platform works or tips and tricks on how to get things going. And you can also ask questions of the team in that shared space if you want.
I apologize if you already answered this, but did you touch on seeding content, resources, and questions and things like that?
I did not. What a great question. And yes, you absolutely should do that. So the worst thing in the world would be to launch a community and a student comes in and it is just a giant empty hallway. Now, you do not need to seed a tremendous amount of content, but our guess is that you either have a set of resources already on hand that you think students should have access to, and you probably have some frequently asked questions that every student is going to ask. And so we will work with you during that implementation process to get those items preloaded into your community, tagged and preloaded and ready for learners. And then we usually recommend that you hold back a few of your FAQs until after launch your community, get your students in there, and then model the behavior of the community by asking those additional questions once the students are already in there. Because then they can see the process of somebody asking, somebody answering, and it helps, I guess, not only sort of teach them how to use the product, but it reinforces the trust that they would have with the space. If I ask something here, somebody is going to answer me and it's working as designed.
Since we're talking about all the awesome things that our customer success team does, can you tell us a little bit about the communication plan and how to bring students into the community?
Yeah, and that will vary a little bit depending on the type of community that you have. But in this case, with the coaching and student success community, it's primarily, Anna would be better at saying this. I guess I'm going to say it's threefold. One is that placement piece. So that's not so much about communication, but it's just about getting the community in the right spot so your students can access it. The second is about getting students into the community. So we usually recommend preloading your students into the space if you can. They wouldn't appear to anybody, it doesn't divulge their location in the community. But if activity starts happening, they will start to see notifications about activity in the space. So it can help draw them in a little bit more easily. And then we have a whole set of communication templates that you can use as announcements, emails, text messages to introduce the community and help students, again, understand why it's there, why it's valuable, and how to get in and use it. And you can obviously customize them, but it's a nice starting package to work from.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question and then we're going to continue on. But since we're talking about implementation, how long does it typically take to get a community like this set up?
Yeah, I would say obviously it depends on availability of people, mostly on your side. And primarily it tends to be the tech team because we do really want to have that integration in place. But generally speaking, 2 weeks to get the community set up, integrated, get people trained, and get it launched. I mean, we have a lot of really standardized recommendations that we can bring to the table. So you're not having to start from scratch. We really come and say, here's how we think we should design it. Here's how we think it should look. And then we can build from there.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Keep them coming. I'd rather answer questions than just talk.
Especially for our friends that joined us yesterday too, right? So you'd be
for sure. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into one of these channels. So I'm Coach Katie, and this is my dedicated channel for me and the students that I support. The channels have you have two options with your channels. They can be public, so any student can find them and join them. And maybe student parents would be an example of that. It's an affinity group. I want to go find other people who have a bunch of kids at home that they're trying to figure out how to manage while they're learning. It's a nice place for us to talk to each other. In this case, the Coach Katie channel is actually private. So we have put into that channel specifically the folks that I am working with. But other individuals would not see that channel. They wouldn't be able to just join it automatically. So that is one way to kind of control, who's accessing these spaces if that's important. When I jump in there, you can see that much like the outside space, it is a combination of conversations and resources that are taking place. There's a couple of things that are kind of nice to, well, let me say this. So Inscribe is not a replacement for one-on-one coaching. But that always will and should have a role with your coaches and with your students. The goal of this space is simply to take repetitive tasks that your coach might be doing and centralize them so they only have to do them once, and give them a more scalable way to interact with their coaching cohort, to build rapport, to build relationships, and to facilitate then the jump into those one-on-one sessions. So your space is going to be a combination of like tactical questions that students might have that coaches can help answer, and just fun social engagement. So for example, we have people introducing themselves, saying where they're coming from, maybe what brought them here, what they're excited about, what they're nervous about. Think about how valuable that information is for a coach. If every student comes in and introduces themselves, and as part of that introduction, they say, I have 2 kids, I am also working full-time, I'm super nervous. Like, that's all really great information straight from that student that we didn't have to draw out of them. And when you put it in a space like this, you would be amazed at how much students are willing to share and be vulnerable about in this really authentic way. So that's one of the values. The other is, you can do some fun things to get people excited and active. We have a polling tool in the platform. So here I post a little icebreaker for the students to say, feel free to vote in the chat as well. Totally unrelated to school, totally unrelated to anything, but a really easy way to start engaging and get involved. That's also a really critical element of the community, is how do you create opportunities to engage that are super lightweight? Introducing yourself, responding to a poll, liking somebody else's post. That's so much easier than expecting somebody to create like a fully formed question or conversation narrative right up front. So leading with a lot of these really sort of simple things can be really advantageous. And then what we'll also see is that coaches will use the space as a way to connect to those live events that they're hosting. In some cases, that live event might be a one-to-many. So this coach is having a drop-in session today. They're just going to be sitting in their Zoom or whatever for a couple of hours, and students can drop in and out to ask questions. This has been posted as a live event inside of Inscribe. So I'll just show you quickly here. When you create a live event, you give it a title, you give it a date and time, and then you use whatever meeting link you want to use. So whether it's Zoom or Teams or something else, you just pop it in here and publish it. And so in this case, we've got a drop-in session that's happening right now. When I posted this session, an alert went out to all the students in my channel saying, this is going to happen, you can add it to your calendar. And then 15 minutes before I go live, they all get another reminder. And they can click right back through that reminder to join my drop-in session. And you would be amazed at the increase you would see in participation in these live events simply by advertising them in your community space. The other thing I think is really cool about these spaces is it opens up this synchronous event into an asynchronous conversation. So we can see here that, Pippa wants to join, but she's thinking about the fall, coming and starting school, and hoping that they can talk a little bit about orientation. So now Katie's already prepared to say, okay, I need to have some information about orientation. I want to make sure I touch on this for the learners, and all of that can happen before the live event even starts. The other thing that's nice is if you were to record this session, you could then post it back to Inscribe, so anyone that wasn't able to make it could still watch it and learn from it, and maybe ask you a follow-up question if something that they needed wasn't addressed in that particular event. Similarly, we know that one-on-one sessions are really important, and I'm sure there's many ways that students can reach out and schedule sessions with coaches. I know coaches do a lot of outreach, for example, to students, but you can also just put the link to that scheduling system directly in your community. So here's where you come in, you have a question, maybe it's already been answered. If it's not answered, maybe you ask it of the community and see if you can learn more. But if it's really specific or really high priority, let's schedule that one-on-one session. And in this case, I just have it linked to my Calendly, but whatever scheduling tool you use, you can launch directly to that scheduling tool from the community space. Something that is kind of described in the content here, but I haven't talked about explicitly, is that a community like this doesn't have to be only for students after school has started. In fact, one of the really transformative ways that our partners have been using these spaces is to welcome students in as soon as they are accepted. So, there's that time period for a lot of institutions between when you're accepted and when you start class, and people lose a lot of students during that time. If when they are first accepted, you put them directly into this student success community, you give them access to other students at the university or other students in their incoming class so they can talk to each other. Maybe you have a coach assigned to them, maybe not, but somebody's in there kind of posting information, doing silly polls. Think about how valuable that is for a student in terms of building that connection, feeling like I'm part of the team already. And you can really have a high impact on reducing the melt that occurs in between that time frame. Okay, let me pause.
No questions in the chat at the moment, but I would encourage everyone to drop some questions in there. Where are you headed next? We headed over to Rosie, the flagging system.
I'm going to talk a little bit about Rosie. So the communities tend to be active, but not overwhelmingly active. Most people say to us, it's pretty easy to keep track of what's being posted and what's happening. But I know that there is sometimes concern if I don't have my eyes on the community all the time. How do I make sure that it's staying healthy, that it's staying appropriate? And so one of the mechanisms that we have put in place is what we call our technology assistant, Rosie. And so Rosie does a couple of things. She looks across the community for keywords, and if one of those were to appear, she'll escalate it and let one of the moderators know. But she also just keeps an eye on the sentiment of the community. So in this case, because this student was expressing a deep level of frustration, that's kind of like maybe getting to the end of their rope, Rosie identified that and let Katie know. So this flag is not visible to Pippa, but in the background, Katie was alerted that, hey, Pippa seems to be getting a little bit frustrated. And again, think how valuable that would be for a coach, which is to know ahead of time that a student is really, really struggling. And now I can proactively reach out to them, not just generally, but to say like, hey, I realize you're like FAFSA is giving you a headache. Let's set up a one-on-one time. I can really walk you through this and help you understand what's going on. So it's about focusing the time on the highest priority issues, the students that need the most help, and giving you the insights into what those students are actually struggling with so that you can be really specific in your interventions and really effective in those conversations. There is one other tool set that's available, and that is this chat feature. So in the platform generally, most of the activity is taking place in this conversation area. We do have a resources area where you can post more curated assets. And we talked a little bit about the live sessions. We also recently added a chat feature, which is essentially a way to have a more transactional, casual conversation that doesn't have as much persistence as maybe a conversation or a resource would. And so in these spaces, usually what we see is that each coach will have their own channel where students can post like quick questions or needs to them, go back and forth. It's visible to the other members of the coaching channel, the other members of the channel. So again, they can learn from each other. But it's a little bit easier in terms of, I just have a really quick question or something that's kind of specific to me. Let me post it here and hopefully we can resolve it. And I don't have to initiate like a larger conversation to get it done. You also can get, well, I should say, I'll talk about notifications in a second.
Real quick.
Yeah.
So in the peer-to-peer communities, we typically suggest that you let the students lead. You talked about coaches moderating this community in this use case. Are there other moderators that you would suggest in this use case?
Yes, so this would be an example. Yeah, if you were in the session yesterday, you heard us say, create the community and get out of the way. So a peer community is really less is more. You should probably not talk in there at all if you can help it. This community is a more heavily moderated community. And who does that moderation will obviously vary a little bit on the infrastructure of your school. So it could be coaches, it could be advisors. Sometimes folks have a separate student success team that steps in to run these spaces and interact with the learners. What we would do during the design and implementation process is to really understand what the setup of your institution look like, who has this responsibility today, and then provide a recommendation to you on who should be those moderators and what the community design should be that would be most effective for that setup. So it's hard because I know every institution does things slightly differently. So it's usually best for us to just have a quick conversation with you, understand that, and then provide that more personalized recommendation.
Awesome. How scalable is the platform to accommodate a growing number of students?
This platform was specifically designed for scale. So we have some communities that have 100,000, students in them. That's obviously not common, but it's doable. And from a technology standpoint, no problem. And from an infrastructure standpoint, in terms of moderation and the organization of the community, we really understand how to set that up to accommodate any, you might have 100 students, 1,000 students, or 100,000 students, and we can help you flex to that scale.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. So one other thing I want to touch on, and then I know we're getting close to time, is the idea of notifications. And again, I know we covered this yesterday, but it is so important. So if we will come to the table when we work with you and talk you through all the best practices that we know that will allow you to launch a successful community. And there aren't a ton of them, there's probably 5, 6, but we've tested them over and over and over again. And so communities are not magic. There really is a formula that you can put in place that allows them to launch successfully, grow successfully, and maintain over time. And one of the elements of that we've already talked about is where you integrate it. Another element is the community's ability to let people know what's happening. People are not going to jump into the community every day or every hour to see what's going on. So having a really robust notification system that reaches out to the community members and lets them know what's important and allows them to come back is really critical. And so we have a very detailed notification system, lots of different things that you can get notified on, and very customizable. So you can get notifications right away, you can get a summary, or you can snooze things that you're not interested in. The reason this granularity is critical is if you're emailing a student over and over and over again, they're just going to turn everything off, right? If they have the ability to get into the granular levels and say, okay, this is something that's happening too often, I want to snooze that, but these things I still want to get notified about, then you're going to do a better job serving them and helping them stay engaged with the space. So if you're looking at community platforms, make sure you really dig into what the notification capabilities are and that they're granular enough and appropriate enough. In this case, you see that email is the primary mechanism. We also, just as a reminder, have the mobile app, so students can get mobile notifications and they control all those notifications directly on their phone. And then last but not least, we'll take a quick peek into the community administration area. This is where you'll see all of your participants, who's doing the most, who's posting the most, who's the most active. You can see your community health just overall over time. You can also export all of this data. You can dig into an individual member if you want to learn a little bit more about them and specifically what they have been up to. And you can also see here our reputation system. So giving students credit for their participation in the community, kind of motivating them to maybe get to the next level. It's surprising how many people really love that, getting that notification that they've leveled up, and helping you identify leaders in your community. So if you have students who are super active, who are helping other students, who are really engaging with their coach, you can see that here. You can also see the flip side. So students who have not logged in, who are not engaging, who have never reached out to the coach, and that obviously tells you a lot as well. So maybe you need a different mechanism to reach out to them, or maybe they need a different set of nudges. So it's just adding to the profile, I think, that coaches or advisors or any of your student success team have of the students that they're serving. One more data point to understand, who's on a path to success and who might need a little bit more support. All right, with that, I'm going to kind of get back to close to wrapping it up. Do we have any other questions?
Katie, I'm a lurker in most communities that I'm in. Can you talk to us about like the benefit of giving the lurkers even the opportunity to participate in the community?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I'll bring back this while we're talking about that. Yeah, if you set up a community, don't convince yourself that the only measure of success is how many posts you're seeing in that space. That obviously matters. It's important that people are posting, but that is not the only thing that indicates success. So if I see this ratio here of 200 questions and 27,000 views, that tells me that each of the conversations that took place here was valuable to an enormous number of people. And so you're going to have students who all they do is look at other people's content and read what else is going on. And do not underestimate how powerful and valuable that is for learners. Part of it is just practical. Somebody asked a question, I had the same question, or I didn't even realize I had that question, and I see the answer, and now I have more information than I did before. And some of it really is emotional. If a student posts, I'm a parent, I'm struggling, I have no quiet place to study, I'm so frustrated, I guarantee that there were 10 times as many students in the community feeling the same way, that were too nervous or afraid to post that. And when they see someone else say that, it is so validating to them that, okay, I'm not alone, I'm not the only one. This is a space where I can find people that are experiencing the same thing as me. And that it can, again, just be quite transformative for a student's ability to succeed.
I just want to say absolutely, Amanda. Amanda shared in the chat that they think that we often overlook how impactful a space like this would be for learners who are more shy or timid.
Yeah, yes. And I thank you for saying that as well, because think how hard it is to raise your hand, and even for me today as a grown-up, to raise my hand and speak in a room of people, especially a group of people I don't know, is very intimidating. And if you shift that to an online space where I can take the time to think about what I want to say or craft it a little bit differently, you're going to open up the conversation to a broader group of people. And then even those people that don't feel comfortable with that, you're still welcoming them in by saying, learn from us, share with us, and over time, maybe you'll get more comfortable and be ready to share as well. So it's really about democratizing access to this information and to this sense of connection for all of your students.
I have a question that was sent to just the host and the panelists. Can this setup benefit from alumni interaction with incoming and current students, or is yesterday's setup, the peer-to-peer community, better? They're wondering how others have used alumni success to promote student success, which is my favorite use case.
Yes, we love having alumni in these spaces. We probably see more alumni pulled into those peer-to-peer spaces because they tend to be bigger, open communities. But they absolutely could participate in a space like this as well. That lived experience component of somebody who was where you are and now is somewhere else and can share that knowledge is so valuable and important. And we're going to talk again more about the alumni opportunity in Friday's session, when we really dig into career success and career planning. There's an obvious link there that alumni can play a role in that space as well. But yes, we love the idea of and when people bring alumni into these spaces. I will say sometimes it happens organically because you have students in these communities and they graduate and then they stay in the community. And so you're like building this alumni network organically, but you could also intentionally bring them in.
Talk to us about keeping the community healthy and ensuring that the data or the information inside it is really up to date.
Yes. So as I was saying before, I think one of the nice things about the community is it's much easier to update than maybe a web page. I don't know if you all have control over your web pages. A lot of times when we've talked to schools, having to go through marketing makes it really hard to make changes to those locations, whereas here you have full control. So you can, check on your resources, make sure that any videos you have are up to date. One of the things that we do see people do sometimes, especially year over year, is they might go in and find some conversations that are, time sensitive, time specific. And so what you can do is just archive those conversations. So you're not deleting them. You still have all the data that you can learn from, but they're no longer presented to the students in the community. Something we're working on to facilitate this process is extending the capabilities of Rosie so that she's looking across the conversations in the community and actually making recommendations on things that you might want to archive. So Rosie could look for things like dates or specific events, knowing that those are time dependent, and help you identify them for that cleanup process.
Thank you. So I just added a link to the BYU-Idaho case study. I forgot to share that while you were talking about it a little bit ago, but I think it's probably a good time to try and wrap up things here. If you do have a question, we will stick around. Please go ahead and just put it in the chat and we'll make sure it gets answered.
Awesome. Thank you, Danielle. So thanks again for being here. Tomorrow we are going to be talking about learning communities. So specifically building communities around curriculum and academics. That is a really cool space. If you have courses at your school that have high DFW rates, that have a really high student to instructor ratio, these are great ways to address that head on. And then Friday, we're going to be talking about, as I mentioned, the career planning and success approach. So register if you haven't for those. We also have this upcoming webinar on the 31st with our friends over at University of North Texas. So we're going to dig deep on that use case. Sam can share the vision that they had, the outcomes that they're seeing, and what their plans are for expansion. And I would just love to stay in touch with you. So if you haven't already, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or reach out to me through email. I'm happy to answer any questions. Would love to stay connected or just learn more from you about how you think about this space, what you're doing. And if you are interested in learning more, I think Danielle is going to post a poll. Just give us provide your contact information here. One of the members of our team will reach out. This is a great overview, but it's really helpful, I think, to have a personalized, customized conversation that is specific to your institution. So we'll learn a little bit more about you and then provide some really detailed recommendations on what we think would work best for you and your learners. And with that, I think we are going to say goodbye for today.